When a 5.2 earthquake struck off the coast of Northern California on December 15, 2024, at 10:08 a.m., many were left asking, is this just another tremor or a sign that California is over? This earthquake, centered near Eureka, may not seem catastrophic, but it comes just 10 days after a powerful 7.0 earthquake rocked the same region, one of the largest in recent years. Now, experts are worried that these tremors could be leading up to something far more devastating. With increasing tremors and scientific models warning that California, particularly the Cascadia subduction zone, CS said, is well beyond its usual earthquake cycle, the big question remains, are we on the verge of a major seismic disaster? The concern is growing, and even high-profile residents like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, who live in Montecito, could find themselves in the path of destruction if a major seismic event occurs. So, what's really happening beneath the surface? Are we witnessing the lead-up to the long-feared Cascadia megathrust earthquake, an event that could redefine life on the West Coast? Let's break down the situation, the science behind it, and whether the fears of California being over might actually come true. Recent seismic activity in Northern California has heightened concerns. At 10:08 a.m. on December 15, 2024, Northern California was shaken again. The earthquake, measuring 5.2 in magnitude, struck just offshore near Eureka, startling residents and rattling homes. On its own, this quake wasn't catastrophic, but it raised immediate concerns among seismologists. The tremor wasn't just an isolated incident, it followed closely behind the 7.0 magnitude earthquake that had struck the region just 10 days prior, on December 5. The frequency and intensity of these recent quakes have many wondering, is California over? Normally, aftershocks tend to decrease in intensity over time, but this one was significantly stronger than most would expect so long after the initial event. It raised the unsettling possibility that seismic stress along the fault line was still building rather than dissipating. Reports flooded in from across the region. People in Eureka and Crescent City felt the strongest shaking, though it was also experienced as far south as Fort Bragg. Some described a quick but forceful shake, strong enough to knock small objects off shelves. Others simply felt a rolling motion, an unsettling reminder that the earth beneath them was constantly shifting. For many Californians, the quake served as a sobering wake-up call. Earthquakes are a part of life here, but the frequency and location of these recent events have been causing experts to worry. Even Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, who reside in Montecito, are not immune to the growing seismic risks. Their $14.7 million estate, nestled in the hills near Santa Barbara, may feel worlds away from the shaking up north, but experts warn that no one in California is truly safe from the next big earthquake. This was not just a random tremor, it was a signal that the fault systems beneath the region remain highly active. If the Cascadia subduction zone continues to show signs of instability, the entire West Coast, including the high-profile communities of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Montecito, could face devastating consequences. Seismologists are paying close attention, and they don't like what they are seeing. California has always been a place of natural beauty and geological volatility. Beneath its stunning coastlines and sprawling cities lies a network of fault lines quietly shifting, waiting for their next rupture. Earthquakes are a part of life here, but scientists warn that the state is long overdue for something far more devastating. The San Andreas Fault, perhaps the most famous, runs the length of the state, but to the north, another looming threat remains largely unspoken of in everyday conversation, the Cascadia subduction zone. Unlike the more well-known San Andreas, which produces frequent but moderate earthquakes, the Cascadia subduction zone is a different beast altogether. It is a megathrust fault capable of triggering earthquakes exceeding magnitude 9.0, the kind that lasts for minutes, not seconds, and creates massive tsunamis that could engulf entire coastal cities, similar to the 2011 Japan earthquake and tsunami. Seismologists believe California is living on borrowed time. Historical records show that the last major Cascadia rupture happened in 1700, and the fault tends to break every 300 to 500 years. That means the region is already within the window for another disaster on a scale that would rewrite history. For everyday Californians, these warnings often fade into the background, until the ground starts shaking. But recent earthquakes have reignited fear, especially for high-profile residents like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, whose Montecito mansion sits near landslide-prone hillsides. Experts warn that a major seismic event could cut off entire communities, leaving them without power, water, or emergency services for weeks. It's not just about whether California is over, it's about whether its residents are truly ready for what's coming. If recent tremors are any indication, the next big one may not be a matter of if, but when. Even a moderate earthquake, like the recent 5.2 tremor, can disrupt daily life. In cities like San Francisco and Sacramento, public transit systems such as the Bay Area Rapid Transit momentarily halted to conduct safety checks. Bridges, including the Golden Gate Bridge, underwent structural inspections, a routine but unsettling reminder of the region's vulnerability. In some neighborhoods, the impact was felt beyond just physical damage, serving as yet another warning sign that California may be inching closer to a seismic reckoning. Power flickered and cell networks became congested as thousands of people attempted to call loved ones. While no tsunami warning was issued, many coastal residents remained on edge, knowing that the next major event could bring with it a deadly wave. Perhaps one of the most overlooked effects of earthquakes is their psychological impact. Californians who lived through past disasters, such as the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake or the 1994 Northridge quake, felt an immediate sense of unease. These recent tremors were too familiar, too close, too soon. And then there are the newcomers, people who moved to California from regions where earthquakes are unheard of. For them, these tremors are an abrupt and brutal introduction to the reality of West Coast living. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, this was never part of the plan. When they left the UK for a fresh start in California, earthquakes weren't on the list of concerns. But now, as they raise their children, Archie and Lilibet, in Montecito, they must confront a risk they never had to consider in Britain. Their $4.7 million estate may offer privacy from the media, but it doesn't protect them from the relentless forces of nature. In the event of a larger earthquake, their idyllic retreat could become isolated by landslides, blocked roads, and power outages, turning luxury into a liability. Even the wealthiest Californians must ask themselves, are we truly prepared for what's coming? When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle chose to leave the UK and settle in California, they likely imagined a sun-drenched paradise, a fresh start away from royal duties, relentless tabloids, and the rigid traditions of palace life. But what they may not have considered is the harsh reality of living in earthquake country. Their $4.7 million mansion, perched among the rolling hills and scenic coastline of Santa Barbara, might seem like the perfect retreat, but in a major earthquake, it could become a serious liability. Experts warn that in a significant seismic event, Montecito's steep hillsides could collapse, triggering landslides that could isolate the area. The couple's home, while undoubtedly luxurious, may be at risk for structural damage, road closures, and power outages in the event of a larger quake. If a megathrust earthquake were to strike the Cascadia subduction zone, the effect would extend far beyond Northern California. Tsunami waves, power grid failures, and widespread destruction could impact the entire West Coast, including Montecito. Even if their home survives the shaking, its isolated location means they could be cut off for days or even weeks. And then there's the question of preparedness. Californians who have lived here for years know that emergency kits, evacuation plans, and earthquake drills are a way of life. But for Harry and Meghan, who came from a country where earthquakes are almost non-existent, this is new territory. Have they stocked earthquake go-bags for their children, Archie and Lilibet? Do they have a plan for what happens if communication networks go down? Their celebrity status doesn't grant them immunity from natural disasters. In fact, wealth and exclusivity could become disadvantages if disaster strikes. Unlike in London, where infrastructure is built for stability, California's unpredictable seismic landscape means even the most luxurious properties are at risk. For Harry and Meghan, the recent earthquake is more than just a passing tremor, it's a stark reminder that no one, not even royalty, is beyond the reach of nature's power. As seismic activity continues to increase, one thing is clear: living in California means living with the constant possibility that everything could change in an instant. The ground may have stopped shaking, but the real question remains, is this just the beginning? Earthquakes are not isolated events, they are part of a larger seismic cycle governed by the shifting of tectonic plates deep beneath our feet. And when a 5.2 magnitude earthquake occurs just 10 days after a powerful 7.0 quake, seismologists take notice. The concern isn't just about this single tremor, it's about what it signals for the fault system as a whole. Aftershocks are expected following a major earthquake. They are the Earth's way of redistributing stress after a large rupture. But aftershocks typically follow a pattern. They occur frequently right after the main event and then gradually decrease in magnitude and number over time. That, however, is not what's happening here. When the 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Northern California on December 5, 2024, scientists immediately began tracking aftershocks. Initially, there were dozens of smaller tremors in the magnitude 2.0 to 4.5 range, which was expected. However, as time passed, these aftershocks should have continued to shrink in intensity. Instead, 10 days later, a 5.2 magnitude earthquake struck in the same region, larger than many of the initial aftershocks. This isn't normal. In a typical aftershock sequence, the largest aftershock usually occurs within hours or days of the main event. A gap of 10 days is unusual, suggesting that the fault is still under significant stress. Seismologists say this kind of pattern can mean one of two things: the fault is still adjusting to the initial 7.0 earthquake, and more strong aftershocks could follow, or this is not just an aftershock, it is a sign of ongoing seismic movement that could lead to another major earthquake. If the second scenario is correct, California isn't just experiencing aftershocks, it may be heading toward a larger rupture. Could mean trouble for millions of residents, including Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, who likely never imagined dealing with earthquake threats when they moved to California. While their Montecito estate may seem far from the epicenter, earthquakes don't follow state lines or city borders. If seismic stress spreads south, their community, along with Los Angeles, San Francisco, and other major cities, could be in the direct path of the next major rupture. For Californians, the concern is no longer about if the next big quake will hit, it's about when. And as experts warn, the longer the stress builds, the more catastrophic the next earthquake could be. Fault movement: what's happening below the surface? To understand what's happening, scientists are closely analyzing where these earthquakes are occurring and how they relate to California's complex fault system. The recent earthquakes have been clustered along the southern branch of the Cascadia subduction zone, a megathrust fault that runs from northern California to British Columbia. This fault is unlike the San Andreas fault, which produces more frequent but shallower earthquakes. The Cascadia doesn't rupture often, but when it does, it produces some of the most powerful earthquakes in the world. One of the most troubling observations is that recent aftershocks have been moving south toward the northern extension of the San Andreas fault. While the San Andreas and Cascadia faults are separate systems, they interact in ways that are not fully understood. If stress from the Cascadia subduction zone transfers to the northern San Andreas, it could increase the likelihood of a major earthquake further south, one that could directly impact San Francisco, Los Angeles, and even Montecito, where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle reside. This means more than just shaking, it means the possibility of a cascading failure, where stress from one fault triggers movement on another, leading to a chain reaction of major seismic events. How long will this sequence last? A key question scientists are now trying to answer is, how long will these earthquakes continue? In most cases, aftershocks following a 7.0 earthquake continue for months, sometimes years, but they steadily decrease in intensity. However, some seismic sequences are more complex, lasting much longer than expected and occasionally triggering an even bigger rupture in the process. One of the best comparisons is the 2010 to 2011 Christchurch earthquake sequence in New Zealand. The initial earthquake in September 2010 was followed by months of aftershocks, many of which were stronger than expected. Then, in February 2011, a second earthquake struck, more devastating than the first. Could something similar happen in California? It is too soon to say, but the current unusual seismic pattern raises concerns that the fault is still unstable, meaning that this sequence is far from over. For now, Californians, including Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, are left to wonder, is this just an active seismic period, or is something much bigger coming? Cascadia's megathrust risk: a sleeping giant awakens. For more than 3 centuries, the Cascadia subduction zone, CS said, has remained eerily silent. Stretching over 620 miles from Northern California to British Columbia, this fault is known for producing some of the most powerful earthquakes on the planet. The last time it fully ruptured was in 1700, unleashing a magnitude 9.0 earthquake that sent a tsunami racing across the Pacific Ocean, devastating coastal communities in Japan with incredible force. Now, 324 years later, seismologists warn that we could be entering the danger zone for another catastrophic rupture. The recent seismic activity in Northern California is adding fuel to these concerns. The 7.0 earthquake on December 5, 2024, followed by an unusually strong 5.2 aftershock 10 days later, suggests that stress along the fault is still building rather than dissipating. The big question now is, we're seeing the early signs of another full-margin rupture. Unlike the more frequent, shallow earthquakes along strike-slip faults like the San Andreas, a megathrust earthquake occurs when one tectonic plate is forced beneath another, a process known as subduction. Over centuries, immense pressure builds up as the plates lock together. When the fault finally slips, it releases a colossal amount of energy, resulting in an earthquake that can last for several minutes, rupture hundreds of miles of coastline, and trigger devastating tsunamis. To put it into perspective, a magnitude 9.0 plus earthquake is not just an increase in size, it's a whole different level of destruction. A magnitude 8.0 earthquake releases about 32 times more energy than a magnitude 7.0. A magnitude 9.0? Nearly 1,000 times more powerful. It would shake the ground for 5 minutes or longer, causing widespread structural collapse and creating a wall of water that could wipe out entire coastal towns. For residents along the West Coast, including high-profile figures like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in Montecito, this is not just a theoretical risk. The potential for catastrophic damage, widespread power outages, and blocked emergency routes could turn even the most luxurious enclaves into disaster zones. While scientists continue to monitor the fault for further signs of movement, one fact remains: the longer Cascadia remains silent, the more violent its eventual rupture will be. And when that moment comes, California may never be the same again. Why is the Cascadia subduction zone overdue? Scientists have spent decades studying the history of Cascadia's past ruptures, and the data paints a troubling picture. Large earthquakes along this fault occur every 300 to 500 years, and we are now at 324 years since the last. A major event in the making. Examining the past 10,000 years, the average time between magnitude 8.0 plus earthquakes in this region is 291 years. When expanded to the past 6,000 years, that number rises slightly to 344 years. That means we are now within 81% of recorded intervals where a megathrust rupture has previously occurred. This doesn't mean an earthquake will happen tomorrow, but it does mean we are running out of time. Seismic stress is still accumulating, and unlike volcanoes, which give warning signs, megathrust earthquakes strike without notice. The longer this fault remains locked, the more energy builds up beneath it, meaning the next rupture could be more destructive than anything modern civilization has ever seen. What would a Cascadia megathrust earthquake look like? If the Cascadia subduction zone were to rupture today, the destruction would be unlike anything modern America has experienced. If a magnitude 9.0 plus earthquake were to strike along Cascadia, the entire Pacific Northwest would be thrown into chaos within seconds. Cities along the Pacific Northwest, including Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, would experience some of the most violent shaking in recorded history. Even in San Francisco and Los Angeles, tremors lasting 5 minutes or longer would be strong enough to cause significant structural damage. But the earthquake itself is only the beginning. Within 15 to 20 minutes, a tsunami would form, racing toward the west coast at speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. Coastal residents would have almost no time to evacuate. Given the right conditions, it could obliterate coastal towns in a catastrophic way. Scientists estimate that, in a worst-case scenario, such an event could lead to tens of thousands of deaths, particularly in areas without adequate tsunami evacuation plans. And the terrifying reality? There would be no warning. The ground would shake, and minutes later, the ocean would rise, a nightmare scenario where entire neighborhoods, highways, and skyscrapers collapse before people can even react. Is Cascadia on the brink of a rupture? The recent 7.0 earthquake in Northern California and its unusually strong 5.2 aftershock 10 days later have seismologists on edge. Instead of easing tension along the fault, these quakes suggest that stress is still building, making a future rupture more likely. Several red flags have emerged. Deep tremor activity is increasing, with scientists detecting movement 12 to 16 miles underground in the locked section of the Cascadia subduction zone, the area where pressure accumulates before a major earthquake. GPS data shows coastal land masses shifting eastward, mirroring patterns seen before previous megathrust events. Even more concerning, seismic activity is migrating southward toward the northern extension of the San Andreas Fault, raising fears that stress could transfer between the two systems. If this pattern continues, Cascadia may be closer to rupturing than previously believed. A seismic chain reaction, could the big one come sooner than expected? For decades, scientists have debated whether one major earthquake could trigger another along a nearby fault. With the recent activity in both Cascadia and the San Andreas Fault, that question is no longer theoretical, it may be happening in real time. Stress transfer between faults is well documented. When one fault ruptures, the energy doesn't disappear, it moves. This can happen in two ways. 1. Static stress transfer, where the rupture physically deforms surrounding rock, increasing pressure on adjacent faults. 2. Dynamic stress transfer, where the earthquake's seismic waves weaken nearby faults, increasing the likelihood of failure. This process has been observed before. In 1992, the 7.3 magnitude Landers earthquake in Southern California triggered a 6.5 magnitude earthquake just 3 hours later, despite being 25 miles apart. If the recent Northern California earthquakes have increased stress on the San Andreas Fault, California could be facing its most dangerous seismic period in modern history. The Cascadia-San Andreas connection. The connection between Cascadia and the San Andreas is more significant than many realize. These faults meet at the Mendocino Triple Junction, one of the most seismically active areas in the world. If Cascadia ruptures first, it could increase the chance of a 7.8+ earthquake along the San Andreas, devastating San Francisco, Los Angeles, and beyond. Alternatively, if the San Andreas ruptures first, it could send shock waves northward, destabilizing Cascadia's locked section and triggering a 9.0+ megathrust earthquake. Either scenario would result in a humanitarian disaster on an unprecedented scale. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, Montecito may seem far from the danger zone, but if the San Andreas shifts under stress, Southern California will feel the impact. Landslides, power failures, and infrastructure collapse could leave their exclusive community completely isolated. With Cascadia long overdue and seismic activity ramping up, the West Coast may be running out of time. Experts agree that the next megathrust earthquake is a matter of when, not if. The only question left is, which fault will go first? Crazy to think about how powerful nature can be. How does this make you feel? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, until next time.